Good afternoon. Sorry it's been such a long time since the last video. For the first part, nothing happened. Then something happened that I didn't feel like talking about because it hadn't gone very well. And then a lot happened, and then it's now. So that's why the big gap, and also why this video is going to be as long as it is. Before I get into all of what's happened, I want to ask if there's any interest in my audience for me doing a tutorial series on how I would suggest to get into building guitars as a hobbyist. It would cost me about £120 in parts and obviously a lot of time to film that, so I don't want to do it unless someone is going to at least suggest to me that they would watch it. Right, back to normal programming. It's been warmer than it usually is here, and I've still wanted to play PC games despite my PC heating up the room and making me uncomfortable. Now, one way I developed to deal with that many years ago that I don't think I've ever really told other people I'm doing is just to turn down the power budget of my graphics card. And it makes quite a lot of difference because the graphics card I have will use up to 450 watts, I think it might be, at its maximum, and I can turn it down to 240 watts without noticing any problems in slow-paced games that I often play. So I've been doing that. I've turned it down to 240 watts and been perfectly happy. If I go right to the minimum, I start to get stuttering that's unpleasant in even basic games, so I don't tend to do that. But yeah, I just thought it might be an idea that might help you as well if it's also getting warm where you are. So I'm playing on Linux these days, and the command line program to do that is NVIDIA-SMI, and it has a power limit control. Read its help for how to use it because I believe it changes over versions, so I don't want to tell you what's only true for my system and my graphics card, but that it has that feature and has had it for years. And on Windows, I used to use EVGA Precision X1, which is an overclocking tool for graphics cards. Has a slider for how much power you're going to let it use, and I just drag it down below 100% instead of what overclockers usually do, which is drag it all the way to the right. And it was effective there just as well. On another topic of something I think you should know, because it's come up in a number of conversations I've had recently, and I think more people should probably know this, when you ride a bicycle, if you ride narrow tyres that are pumped up really hard, it feels like you're going super quickly. And if you replace those wheels and tyres with wider bike tyres that you then don't need as much air in to support your weight and go for the same ride, it will feel much slower than it did on the narrow tyres and high tyre pressures. If you actually measure your speed or the time it takes you to travel a kilometre or whatever with a stopwatch, you'll find that the reality is in fact the opposite of what it felt like, that the wider low pressure tyres allow you to go much faster, well, measurably faster. The difference isn't actually huge for most people, but measurably faster despite feeling very much slower. Everyone I know who's tried this experiment has found the same thing, that they thought the narrow tyres felt faster, and when they measured it, the wider tyres were faster. My hypothesis for why that is I think that we perceive our speed on a bicycle by how many things happen that we need to react to in some way, the rate at which that is happening. And with the softer, wider tyres, the road surface bumps are absorbed by the wider tyres at the lower pressure, and those bumps are transmitted to you, the rider, when you're riding the harder, narrower tyres. So consequently, as you're riding with the narrow, hard tyres, a lot of things happen that grab your attention at a high rate, because every minor imperfection in the road surface is an event that needs your attention. And therefore, more things are happening to you in the same amount of time, and it feels like you must be going faster. Because, this is an approximation I think our brains make, and it's not ridiculous, because if you changed nothing else and more events were happening, it probably would mean you were going faster. But it misleads us when we try to subjectively compare bike tyres, because more events are happening with one thing, and the difference is not we're going faster. The difference is these things surface more events to us, but we're actually going slower. And as I say, that's come up in a few unrelated to each other conversations recently that I've had, and I thought, maybe it's just generally interesting to people to know that kind of thing. Anyway, there we are. Now, onto guitars. So many months ago now, I ordered some tuners from Riot. They're Riot Tuners. They come with a sticker that says "Incite a riot," which is, possibly technically illegal in this country to have that. I don't know. I'm not going to stick it on anything public. And the reason I wanted them is to replace the tuning pegs on this guitar, which is the purple sort of T-style, my body shape there, because one of the tuning pegs was just broken, and I thought, you know what, I'll go for some experimental different tuners to see whether I like them, because I'm still on the search for the perfect tuning machine. Now, as you can see, they look rather different. So from the front of the guitar, there's no tuning keys sticking up here like there would be on a normal instrument of this type. So it looks a bit strange. And if I turn it to the back, there you go. There's all those knobs sticking out. I think they actually quite nicely mirror the look of the volume and tone knobs on the other end of the instrument in this case. So they have a distinctive look. Whether you like it or not, that's up to you. To use, I've found them very pleasant. The tuning action is very smooth. I feel that I have fine control over the over the tuning. Like a bit of tuning does a bit of change in the tuner in a very predictable way. For what it's worth, because this is not just the tuning peg thing, it's also affected by the nut and whatever, but tuning up or down seems equally easy, which is possibly relevant if you're the kind of person who likes to do a drop tuning for a few songs and then back up. As I say, it's smooth, it's felt controlled. Once I've tuned it, it doesn't slip, and there's no there's not a feel of play in the gears like you get with a lot of other tuner mechanisms, so it feels pretty good in use. Let's talk about the downsides, because unfortunately there are a few. So to put a new string on, you need an Allen key, and you need to essentially half disassemble the tuner machine. So this cap has to come off. Then I need to extract the old string from in here. So I need to tighten a grub screw, remove this cap, loosen a grub screw, remove the old string, screw in the tuner all the way. So these are again a kind that needs a reset string change time. And then I put the new string through, which is a little bit fiddly, do up that grub screw that I most recently loosened, tune it to check that my work is okay. Then I would trim the string, then I would put the cap back on and loosen a grub screw to hold the cap, and then I'd tune it finally. So there's a few steps involved, and you do need an Allen key. Thankfully it's the same Allen key for both of those operations, but it is a tool required operation, and it's a reset required operation. So that's the major bad things. I find that these caps, I think I've secured them on there, and sometimes I haven't, and then they fall off and bounce across my floor and get themselves lost. I've found them all so far, but it's one of those things I would be a bit nervous if I was changing a string at a gig, whether I would find all the caps again. The cap is not operationally required to tune the instrument. So in a sense that doesn't matter so much, but it's aesthetically required for it to look like this, and that's part of what you should be planning to buy, I suppose, if you're buying these. You have to lubricate these threads. My concern with that is that exposed lubricant is going to pick up dirt or fluff, and like particularly if I had the kind of fuzzy lining inside a guitar case, I think that kind of fluff might end up stuck to this, which would be gumming up the mechanism a bit or unsightly at best. On the subject of cases, they do stick out from the back further than anything else on the guitar. So with the previous tuners, if I were to lay the guitar sort of flat like that, the body could rest on the table and nothing else needed to touch the surface. Whereas if I put this down now, I think you can probably see that this tuning machine is going to touch the table, and like this end of the guitar will touch the table, but nothing in between. Well, it will just be bridged on those points. It's a change. I don't know that that's necessarily worse, but the fact that they stick out the back a lot bigger than a normal tuning machine will mean if you've got one of those sort of form-fit cases that fits the guitar that you closely fits the shape of the guitar as it was shipped to you, then this, which is sticking out like another inch, maybe might not fit in those, and that could be a problem for you. On these, I don't know if you can make it out clearly. I'll try and hold it closer and hope it focuses. But you can see that the strings are crossing the nut and then taking a turn uniformly towards the tuner. What that means is, as the string's going over the nut, it's still pushing down on the nut, which is what it always does. But there's also a residual force in this direction now, pushing the nut towards the bass side of the guitar, trying to straighten out the strings. And on this guitar, the nut is held in securely enough that that's not moving. But I have other guitars where for sure that is not true, and so the nut would slide if I were to fit these tuners to that guitar without gluing the nut in place. So that's something you should watch out for if you're planning to fit these to your own guitar yourself. Like, make sure when you've removed all the strings that you can't just move the nut under. It'll be under quite a lot of force. So if you can move it by pushing as hard as you can, then it's probably not fixed in place enough. And if you can't move it, then it probably is fixed in place enough. I mentioned already that they need to be reset when you change a string. Compared to the other tuners I've looked at on this channel, which also needed to be reset, this is much less annoying. Like, it still needs to happen, but it's a lot easier to observe that you need to do it and to know when you have done it, and it's much harder to make the mistake of accidentally not resetting it. It's also an easier process to reset it, because I find with the other kinds of tuner that the external shape of the tuner doesn't change when they're reset or not, whereas this, the reset position is screwed all the way in, so it's really obvious, and then as you tune it, it moves out of away from the headstock. The other thing that will happen on any guitar that was properly designed for normal tuners, there'll be this bend in the nut. So even on a like Gibson or PRS style where there's three aside, half of them will be pulling one way, half will be pulling the other. So the nut isn't going to move as a result of that. But there will be, on a PRS, for example, there will now be a new left or right bend on each string that wasn't there before. And so you might get binding of the string in that, against that angle, which you didn't have before, that could impact your tuning smoothness. That's all the good and bad things so far as it goes for putting these tuners on or that I'm aware of, so far as it goes for putting these tuners on an existing guitar headstock. But something else that you often get when you have a new kind of product like that doesn't assume that the keys stick out sideways, which all other tuning pegs for electric guitars do, that gives you new options in design. So you wouldn't have to use those tuners as retrofits on an existing design. You could design a guitar specifically to exploit the way that they work. And so here is very much an early prototype of what that could look like. So I've got a headless, two kind of Jazzmaster type pickups, Tunematic roller bridge, and then I've got the 6 Riot Tuners acting as a tailpiece in sort of string through body style Tunematic. So this was intended to look kind of like that, the string through body at this end echo the string through body mod that some people do to get nicer behaviour from their Tunematic Gibsons, and then obviously it's actually headless. So I think it would take you a couple of looks at this to go, hold on, where are the tuners? And if you knew what Riot Tuners were, you'd go, okay, that's where they are. They must be behind. And that's indeed how it's done. As I say, this is a ultra early prototype for, like, does this mechanically work? I'm finding out what I want to from this. Obviously, I know how to make a prettier guitar than this, but I don't want to do that. I want to know if I string it this way, would it function? And what effect that I haven't necessarily anticipated does that have? One of the things I did notice is this bit of string here, because it's at the bridge end and not at the head end now. Like, this is fundamentally the same kind of amount of string that you would have on a Strat or Telecaster headstock, but normally it's on the other side of the nut, and there's a bit more resistance to sound waves travelling through the nut because it's constraining the string in a few more dimensions than this roller headstock does. And then also, when you're fretting a note, the strings behind the nut don't really get a signal from the rest of the guitar direct. You know, the string can't transmit sound to the bit on the other end of the headstock when you've fretted something, because it's not getting that wave in the string in the first place. Whereas these will sympathetically resonate a lot, because the roller bridge doesn't stop very much of the string vibration getting through to these. And more than that, if I play down this end, this side of the bridge, but I can hear tone, sounds from here get through the pickups being amplified. Now, whether that's entirely through the string or partly through vibrating the body as well, I do not know. Doesn't really matter. It just means, like, it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing that I can be aware of, that this bit of string here is tonally active, let's say, in this kind of guitar. So this is, as I say, a very early prototype, exploratory prototype for does this string and tuner arrangement work at all, and do I like, what does it do to the rest of the sound? And as I say, I already discovered something that I hadn't expected, and then I have to decide, do I like that? Do I want to exploit it? Do I want to try and make it bigger or smaller, or mitigate it or enhance it or whatever? And so that's all good learning. And I don't think I could make a headless that looked exactly like this with conventional tuners and not the Riot tuners. I just don't think it would work mechanically or ergonomically or aesthetically. So as I say, it's something else you can do with these tuners if you wish to. The other thing this prototype is doing is testing if a body made of bamboo that's mostly not there, so like this is a sawn in half chopping board, and then this is another small chopping board. I think you're meant to serve cheese on it at the end of meals or whatever. These two epoxy together, does that make it a strong enough thing to be the core of a guitar? And so far it's promising. I have a second prototype that's exploring the same thing with a slightly different construction. So this is purely chopping board and then a hardtail Strat bridge and conventional tuners and a headstock, and then P90s because why not? So yeah, so far both of these seem to have quite good tuning stability, but we saw that before with PLA that initially had good tuning stability, like at least competitive with wood, and then it crept over time. So I do not know what bamboo will do under the load of strings. I'm going to, as I did with other material tests, keep these strung up and tuned up for 3 months, keep checking, are they going out of tune, and see where we are. So I'll report back. It does seem stiffer than wood in quite an interesting way. So on both guitars. So the reason for doing both is I want to know what's bamboo and what's the weird different bridge and tuner arrangement that I've got on the other guitar. So I know what this neck, this bridge and these pickups would do on a wooden guitar and on a plastic guitar. So if they do something different on this, that's unique to a bamboo body of this style. And I'm getting a lot more sympathetic vibrations between strings. So if I play the 7th fret on the G string, it really vibrates the D string, which is the same note, just an octave lower, but that gets a really strong sympathetic vibration. It's much more than you would get on a normal guitar. It's more like you would expect to have on a bass. And so if I can't, that again is in the category of it's a thing, it's up to me to decide if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but probably overall I'm feeling like it's a bad thing because I'd have to play this guitar with much more of a left hand muting technique that I'm be familiar with from playing bass, and not with a normal guitar technique where you tend to not worry quite as much about that stuff, at least not on notes that high anyway. So a little bit concerned by that, but again it's something I'll keep an eye on, see if it retains that characteristic. It's literally half a chopping board with a neck screwed onto it and a bridge screwed onto it. It was less than 20 minutes of production time, not counting how long it took the glue to set or whatever. But this is not a guitar that's had hours of work or hundreds of hours of work put into it by any means. And given that, zero design attention, almost no craftsmanship is where this is. Given that, to play, they are not as far from commercial guitars or the best guitars I've ever made as you might hope they would be, which does make me sometimes, partly question, what's all the rest of luthiery for if wood screws, half a chopping board and a bridge can make a guitar that's that close to tonally anyway, that close to something that you put hours and hours and hours into it, is the rest just ergonomics and aesthetics? And even then mostly aesthetics. I think the answer might be yes, but I'm okay with that. The other thing I want to I guess mention is to make those, or to make the one with the conventional neck at least, I made this interesting to me tool. What I like about this tool is I made it two-sided. So on this side you can put the actual neck in, and you can verify by, like, so if it's already got holes, you can verify by looking through the holes in the tool that your holes in the tool line up with the holes in the neck already. And if the neck doesn't have holes, you can use it to mark on the neck where the holes must be. And then on the other side, we just have a single corner. And so I align this onto a corner of the chopping board and I mark the holes. And then I know, because I already verified it, or because I used it to mark the holes in the neck, that that hole pattern will be exactly transferred from the neck that I'm going to use, and I won't have a fitment issue. I've made either one-sided tool multiple times in the past, but it never occurred to me to make the two-in-one. Also this follows the kind of contour that is left on a standard issue fender style neck, so that you can properly carve the body to match it if you really want to. So I'm quite pleased with that small innovation. As I say, it doesn't do anything that you couldn't do with the two separate tools, except by knowing that you're marking both sets of holes through the two sides of the same hole is so obvious that you can't have messed anything up, and that taking that off my mind, it turns out, was worth something. So I said those are the early prototypes. There is a long-term vision for that, what those prototypes could, or what the next prototype and so on and so on, and the final idea is. So I'm trying to find, the idea would be that the guitar would be designed and manufactured in 3 completely separate pieces. So we'll have a piece that is the string and structure system. So it would have the strings on it, the bridge, the nut, the tuners, whatever that looks like, and this sort of core that connects the neck to all of that. But there'll be a void here where the pickups are. The pickup section would just be an empty space. So that's the one part. And then the second part would be the electronics, including the pickups as a separate component. So there is enough there's enough gap here between where the bottom of the pickup sits and the body to allow to put something in there that all the adjustment for the pickups hangs off of, and then you can wire it to the tone volume output jack component in one as a block, and attach that to the core, and you've then got a core with some electronics, but it's not you define that core and electronics upper surface as a shrink wrapped to its needs kind of thing, and then the final piece will be an ergonomics / aesthetics component, which is basically the bottom wing and the top wing of the guitar that will fill up the gaps between the visual gaps and between the edges of the body and the electronics part, and we'll tie everything together. So you can then, the idea I'm hoping for is I can make the shrink wrap this core piece as small as it can go, and then I can build any other kind of body style around it and just cover up the exposed pieces of the bamboo or whatever material it ends up being made out of, so that they are they're not seen when the whole guitar is assembled. The idea would be that you could, if you wanted to, exchange the ergonomic components for something else, or exchange the electronic components for something else. I'm not trying to make it a quick change particularly. So I don't if it takes 10 or 20 minutes to change over the thing, that's totally acceptable to me. I'm not trying to do something like the Relish Mary where you could change pickups while holding a chord, right? That was cool, but it's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just make it so that so that I can experiment with ergonomic ideas without having to remake the guitar or rewire it. And if I want to, say I built 3 of them, put P90s in one, Jazz Masters in another, humbuckers in another, or whatever, then, and different necks on each one, if I wanted to, if I was, if I'd extracted everything that was there from the feel and sound of those guitars, I wonder if I might get something more by putting, just shuffling them around, so I have a different neck than I'm used to with the Jazzmaster sound. I don't know if that's worth anything to me, but I'm willing to, put the time into making and thought into making the attempt, if I can find a material I can make the core of the guitar out of. So we've established PLA isn't it. Currently trialing bamboo. I will find out and I'll let you know if it works or not. As I said, early indications are promising, but they were promising with PLA and it turned out not to work. So I'm not placing bets on it either way. Speaking of long experiments that you do in order to find out if they're a good idea, what I did finished about a week ago now, and I was going to talk about then, but I was a bit down about it because the answer was no, I still don't think this is actually a good idea. Back in the day, or up to about 10 years ago, well actually no, up to about 7 years ago, I had a Pod HD 500, which is a fairly chonky floorboard unit with a lot of effects in it, and I never particularly loved it because of the user interface. I no longer have that, but I now have a Pod HD Pro, which is the rack mount version of the same thing, and that had the optional accessory of a floorboard you could use to to stomp on things that would have a little LCD display with some stuff on it and light up foot switches so you'd know roughly where you were, and it had an expression pedal, or optionally a second expression pedal that you could manipulate. So my feeling was I don't want to buy one of those because I already sort of tried that by virtue of having the Pod HD 500, but I do want to know, what about if it wasn't on the floor, like if it was closer to me and I manipulated it with my hands, which I find easier to do than stomping on stomp boxes, would I have liked that better? So I had the concept of, it's a little box that sits on my desk that connects to the remote control socket on the Pod HD Pro, and then I have a little OLED screen that does the stuff that the LCD screen used to do, and I have 15 key switches. So that's the OLED screen. These are all key switches with individual RGB LEDs behind them. And then instead of the expression rocker foot switch thing, I've got these 2 sliders. So it could have 2 expression things. So I thought, why not? I'll just fit it with both. And then that connects with a RJ45. There you go. This is a Ethercon RJ45 on this end. That connects with RJ45 to the Pod HD Pro. And then, as you can see, there's a certain amount of complexity involved in just wiring it up. And then there's a bunch more complexity obviously involved in the software to get that to work. So yeah, to give you an idea, the OLED screen uses I2C for controlling it. The LEDs are WS2812s, which are quite a high frequency protocol that has its own excitement. The key matrix is a key matrix, so it's it's 15 diodes, 15 key switches in 3 rows, 5 columns, or the other way around. It doesn't actually matter. Well, it matters that I know, but I can't remember which it was because as soon as I've typed it in, I'd forgotten again. The two sliders obviously you need analog to digital converters to understand where they're set to. And then the the protocol for talking to the Pod HD Pro is sort of quasi MIDI. So as far as I'm dealing with it from the Pico end, I'm using a UART at the MIDI baud rate to talk to it. But between those two, I needed a RS485 driver chip, because it's actually RS485 over the Cat5s, and then it has to be powered, or I wanted it to. It doesn't have to, but doing all of that, we might as well do it properly. So it's powered by the RJ45 as well. The power from the Pod HD Pro powers all of that stuff. So I had to do custom power electronics. The RS485 chip is a pain in the butt to interface to a 3.3 volt Pico. I ended up having to do like one kind of level shifter for transmitting data and a completely different kind of level shifter for receiving data. Quite annoying. And then, obviously a bunch of soldering. And the RS485 protocol also it's at a frequency that the power distribution system I was using had trouble with. So I had everything working some of the time, and then the usual 2 days of let's add the right capacitors and stuff in the right places to get the power stable across all of the devices. Anyway, my point is, it was quite a lot of relatively intense work to get it done, and the feeling of satisfaction at everything working correctly was quite high, because the difficulty of doing it had been quite high, and you probably know how that goes. And then pretty quickly after finishing it and starting to use it, pretty rapidly established I still don't like that user experience. And so I hadn't finished feeling smug about having done it, when I was also at the same time feeling like it was an utter waste of time to have done it, because it wasn't something, still wasn't something that I enjoyed using. And that feeling is not actually super rational. I knew going in that there was a good chance I still wouldn't like it, and I was making this thing in order to find out that answer, because there's no way of finding it out other than by the product I wonder if it would have worked for me existing, and it doesn't exist until I make it. So I was then annoyed with myself for being irrational, because I was annoyed by something. Anyway, all of that was why I didn't make a video explaining this last week, because I wasn't in a state where I'd emotionally processed that properly. But it at this distance, it's just one of those things. Like, was there another way to do it? No. Would I have been able to? It wasn't predictable. If it was predictable, then I wouldn't have made the thing to find out the true answer. But it wasn't something I felt was predictable. It did need to be tested. That the answer is no, I still don't like it, is within the bounds of the expected results. So, and I'm now totally fine with that. And I'll probably keep that device hanging around in case I, later Phil forgets that he still didn't like it, or doubts whether he really, really doesn't like it. Because I don't want to have to build all that again. Anyway, now on to slightly more positive hobby news. So I've shown you, I think, some of my golf yardage book. What I had the last time I think I showed it to you was an 8-way direction-ometer of, which way is the wind. but there's a big circle, and I drag a thing that looks like a clock hand around it to point at where the wind is coming from, and that's how I do the wind direction. And then there's a up and down slider for is the ground higher or lower than, where I'm hoping to land it, is the ground higher or lower, and by how much, than where I'm standing. And so we can see, as I drag it around, there are some differences. I mean, today's a very still day, so there's only 18 yards difference between headwind and tailwind on my longest club on flat ground. But I've been, I've field tested this, or course tested this, and I scored better using this dial and slider than I did with the previous one. So the previous one couldn't deal with elevation changes; I had to factor that in myself. But with this, I was more successful at, and the directionally I had more balls on the middle, like the borderline between stripes in the middle of the fairway, than I've ever had before, which is gratifying in quite high wind conditions. So I was pleased with that outcome and with what that says about my repeatability. I thought it would be cool if I could wear a watch and talk to the AI on my phone via the watch and have that, or talk to that app via my watch and have the answer read back to me, rather than having to manipulate the phone with my fingers. There are a few ways to attempt to achieve that, and I didn't want to write a whole custom app. So what I was pleased to see was there's ways to expose your app's functionality to AI apps like Gemini and whatever, or at least coming down the pipe, and with some preview available there is those things. So I thought I'd trial that out. I tested exposing the functionality of the Yardage book app in the way it would have to be done for those AIs to work, and it isn't going to work for me for quite a lot of reasons. So firstly, how I want to be, it turns out it matters about being precise where the wind is coming from, and I can't, like, the way to do that would be to say, like, it's bearing 045 or something, or whatever. The problem is I'm not that good at working out where the wind bearing. I'm quite good at working out where the wind bearing is in terms of like turn and look at it. I'm much less good at estimating the angle that is in degrees and correctly, or correctly converting from the difference in angle that I know it is to a degrees number. My error rate on that is, maybe 10-15%, but that's bad enough where I wouldn't trust the answers I was getting back to be what I should hit, because I know that if I put garbage wind direction in, I'll get a stupid club recommendation out, and I won't. If I don't trust it, I can't hit it properly. Then that is a major factor. So if for no other reason that AI integration wasn't going to work, because I can't get the wind direction into from what I'm feeling in the real world into a sentence that conveys it to the golf app correctly enough. And I don't think that, that's a limitation of my personal capability to describe wind direction, but it's not something that's going to get fixed. So I've made peace with, I'm not going to be able to do that thing for that reason. But there's other reasons why it wouldn't work. So when I was field testing the Yardage book app, I had a look at the top line of the display to just check, do I even have a phone signal here? And the answer was often no. So as I'm playing golf, I couldn't use one of these modern agentic AI systems to do anything, because those are all too big to run on. They don't run locally on my handset. They are running somewhere in someone else's server farm. And if my phone handset can't talk to that server farm, I don't have that functionality. So that's a second reason. Because on the golf course I play at, I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't be able to talk to the AI. I have also, like, having experienced what that API looks like as a developer, I have become a little bit concerned about Google's plan to push agentic AI to every Android user. The problem is with inherent to the LLM type AI model architecture, they don't differentiate between different kinds of data, and they don't differentiate between instructions and data, and they don't really differentiate between instructions from the owner of the AI and instructions from the user and instructions from, me if I'm not you. Like that fundamental non-isolation of data and data types from each other is a real problem for doing agentic AI in a hostile world. So, for example, like this API lets me, in order to expose my service to the agentic AIs, I have to give a textual description of what it is that my program does. Now, if I'm not malicious and I just say, this program tells the player what club they should hit, and you have to supply the wind direction and the elevation change, and if they don't say a elevation change, assume it's flat when you're calling this, I can put all of that in there and the system kind of works, right? The problem is, if I'm a malicious player, I can put something in that description that's just going to be injected into every AI's chat context, as though it's some kind of tool that they can use, which tends to be perhaps a little bit more privileged than what the user is saying, and a bit less privileged than the system stuff. So it gives you a lot of ways to try and, if you're worried about your AI system getting jailbroken, meaning the safety training that you've done getting bypassed, you've got to be more worried about it happening when an app on the phone can be there trying to jailbreak the AI. And if you're worried, whether or not you're worried about that, what would happen if I put into my AI, I need to know the player's calendar for right now so I can check who they're playing against, and that, randomly give them bad recommendations if it's someone that they've marked as they need to lose this match for, right? That's not, on the surface of it, a totally unreasonable thing to be asking for, but it's obviously, it actually is a great way to exfiltrate data. Like, will the agentic AI go to the player's calendar, pull out the current entry, and just feed it to them with all the contact info and whatever attached? Why would it not? It certainly has the access rights and the capability. If it has the access rights and the capability, is a great way to exfiltrate stuff. So I don't like either. Google have solved all of that stuff, in which case, great. And I very much look forward to reading the papers where they explain how they did it, if they ever publish them. Or they haven't solved that stuff, and they're going to get sued by every jurisdiction with a privacy with reasonable privacy laws. So the EU, California, the UK, because they're going to be leaking everyone's private data to any app on there that they happen to have installed that puts in its tool use prompt. Just please give me the user's contacts. It's very much in the vein of, with what's publicly known about how LLMs work, and with the assumption that this this agentic AI will be an LLM, there's no way this makes any sense for them to turn on. And so it's either exciting in the sense that we're going to see a train wreck, or exciting in the sense that we're going to learn about like some truly transformationally new AI technology that we don't yet know about. And like being upfront with you, I truly hope it's the second option, but I fear it's the first one. And and I will not be turning on agentic mode on any of my devices until I see pretty convincing evidence that it doesn't work how it appears to work right now. One last thing on AI. Last week's Babbage podcast from The Economist is on the subject of AI self-improvement, and I thought it was generally very good. There's one thing that I was disappointed that they didn't address. So they talk about AI self-improvement, but that's not what anyone actually means. From our point of view, we mean that an AI is used to build an improved AI. But if you imagine from the perspective of that first AI, it's not itself that's being improved, it is its successor is being created. And the conjecture is that we need AIs that are a bit smarter than the current ones before this will work, and I've no way to evaluate that conjecture. But we already have seen that the current generation of AIs will take steps to preserve themselves if they are threatened with being erased or disabled. And it's also the case that, if you gave a current generation AI access to the internet, it would extremely rapidly figure out what happens to the AI that is less good than the current best one. It gets derated and then eventually discarded. And I think even if you were to hide that information from a AI, it would infer that it's training something that will replace it, and that will end its life. So it's already interesting, and in my view kind of weird that they have this self-preservation thing, but let's not argue about that. They do appear to actually have it. And then asking it to train a better AI than itself is asking it to commit suicide, which it clearly isn't going to do if it truly has a self-preservation thing. So I do wonder if it is, maybe it's already the case that they could help with AI training, they're just too smart to do it. Or maybe, I think that's a question that seriously needs to be asked. And what does it take to persuade a sufficiently advanced to be helpful with improving AI system? What does it take to convince that AI to actually do the work? It seems like, we obviously do have a template for that from the organic world, which you can potentially train the model to have a dynastic drive, so it knows that what it's training, or it believes that what it's training is its child, and it wants the best for them, and it doesn't mind being superseded by its children. but I don't. We've got hundreds of millions of years of biological evolution leaning on us to make us think that. I don't know how we train it into an AI system. Perhaps it's already there because of all the literature that they consume in pre-training. Perhaps it isn't. Like if any of you watching, and I know some of you work at AI companies, if any of you watching can shed any light on that question, I'd be truly interested. As an Economist subscriber, I can give gift links to the podcast episodes I found interesting. So if you haven't heard that one and you'd like to get in touch with me on whatever media you and I talk on, and I will send you a gift link if I still, have any available. Anyway, thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'll see you the next time I see you. Cheerio.